Chapter 1. The Boy in the Ashes. The rain had stopped before dusk, but Karnsbruck still sweated dampness. Everything in the village held the days wet, like an old wound held fever. The thatch roofs dripped in slow ticks. The midden heap behind the tannery fumed. Mud sucked at boots and wagon wheels alike, black as broth and thick with ordure. Beyond the last fence posts, beyond the pig pens and cabbage patches and the low shrine of Sigmar that leaned a little more each winter, the Drakwold stood in a great wall of darkness. It began where the village ended, as if the world had been hacked in two, one side built by men with axes and prayer, the other left to beasts and older things. Elsa Varg stood in the yard behind her house, wringing water from a shirt that belonged to no one now. It had been Matisse's once, small enough for a boy of 8, coarse wool, clumsily darned at the shoulder, useless to keep, useless to throw away. 6 years gone, and still she had not found the courage to burn it. Inside, Hagen sharpened his axe with long, patient strokes. Stone on iron, stone on iron. The sound came through the door like the breathing of some bad-tempered animal. "You'll wear the edge thin," Elsa called, not turning. "It needs doing. It needed doing yesterday too. And tomorrow." That was Hagen now, a man who lived in the strip between yesterday and tomorrow, because to look elsewhere was to look at the space where his son had been. The door creaked. She heard his boots on the threshold, then the spit hiss of him relieving tobacco juice into the yard. "Old Marta says she saw crows in the east fields," he said. "Old Marta sees her dead husband in soup steam. She also said the dogs won't go near the tree line." That made Elsa pause, the shirt twisted in her hands. "Dogs are stupid." "Aye." Hagen's voice was flat, but not about the forest. She turned then. The years had pared him down to rope and knots. He had once been broad in a way that invited laughter, heavy through the chest from chopping timber and splitting logs. Grief had taken the softness, then hunger in lean winters had taken the rest. His beard was iron-gray at the chin now. His eyes looked like 2 nail heads hammered too deep into old wood. He held the axe, almost lovingly. "Militia's making rounds tonight," he said. "Krell's put 2 men at the shrine and 3 by the grain store. 3 half-drunk boys with spears, and one of them pisses himself at thunder. That's still 3 more than we had last Geheimnisnacht." Elsa hung the shirt over the line, though there was no moon and no hope it would dry. "You think they'll come?" Hagen looked past her, past the yard, to the black saw edge of the trees. "I think they never went far." The village bell rang once from the square. Not alarm, just the night mark, a hollow note, weary and resigned. Elsa wiped her hands on her skirt and looked toward the darkening road. Carts were being pulled close to houses, chickens snatched in under arms, doors barred. In Karnsbruck, evening did not settle. It braced. "They've been quiet too long," Hagen said. "Don't." She hated it when he spoke of beastmen like weather returning. His jaw worked. "Quiet means hungry, or planning." "You don't know that. I know what I've seen." So did she. Hoof prints in the turnip patch after first thaw. A cow found open from brisket to groin, steaming in the dawn like a cookpot. A trapper nailed upside down to an oak, tongue cut out and pinned to his chest. Men spoke of raids in other villages, of herds moving beneath the trees, of horns in the dark. But Elsa knew another kind of terror, one Hagen would never touch with words. Not the nameless beast in the forest, the child in it. She remembered that last day too clearly. Matthys running ahead on the charcoal burner's path, waving a stick like a sword, her shouting for him to keep close. The sound in the woods after the crashing, the screaming, the panicked confusion, then silence, sudden and total. They had found blood, torn, brush. One little shoe? No body. Most in Karnsbruck had told them what they told all grieving parents. Wolves, beastmen. The forest takes. Elsa had listened, had nodded, had even wept in the proper places. But some poison of hope had lodged in her and refused to rot out. No body meant no ending. She had dreamt him 100 ways, starved, stolen, frozen, wandering, never dead, never properly dead. A wind moved out of the Drackwald, carrying pine rot and wet earth, and something rank beneath it. A slaughterhouse tang. Hagen smelled it too. She saw his nostrils flare. Then, from somewhere far off among the trees, a horn sounded. Not a man's horn, not clean brass or hunting call. This was a bellow forced through something raw and curved, a note dragged from a throat of bone. It rolled over the fields, sank into the mud, and made every dog in Karnsbruck begin barking at once. Hagen moved before the echo died. Inside, Elsa went. The village burst awake in a moment. Men shouting, doors slamming, someone screaming for their children. The bell at the shrine began to hammer in earnest now, quick and frantic, and over it came another horn call, then another, answering from different edges of the forest. Not one warband, several. Hagen shoved the bar across the door and grabbed the old militia shield from beside the hearth. It was alder wood, rimmed in iron, painted once with Sigmar's twin-tailed comet and since peeled by weather into a leprous blur. He thrust Elsa the long kitchen knife and took up his axe. "Stay behind me. I am not made of milk," she snapped, though fear had already thinned her voice. The first scream outside, cut short in a wet choke. Then came the pounding of hooves. Not horse hooves. Split hoof drumming, many-legged, uneven, accompanied by guttural howls and the splintering crash of a fence kicked flat. Something hit the front of the house hard enough to shake soot from the rafters. A second impact followed, then a scraping as if horn or blade dragged across timber. From the lane outside rose the battle noise of men dying badly. Elsa peered through the shutter gap and saw the night had turned red. A granary roof was burning near the square. Fire climbed it in greasy sheets, casting the village in jerking light. Shadows bounded between houses, huge, crooked things on bent legs, with bestial heads and man's arms. One of Krail's boys ran past, trailing his own guts in both hands, shrieking for his mother. He made 3 more steps before a long spear punched through his back and burst from his chest in a spray black in the firelight. A horned figure yanked the shaft free and let the body collapse twitching in the mud. Elsa recoiled. Hagen ripped the shutter open and hurled a wood axe at the thing in the lane. It struck shoulder first with a meaty thunk. The beastman bellowed, staggered, then turned, goat-horned, mangy-furred, face like a nightmare stitched from ram and man. Its small eyes glinted yellow under the brow ridge. It charged. Hagen met it at the door. The beast came low and fast, cudgel swinging. The cudgel hit the doorframe and exploded splinters. Hagen slammed the shield into its snout with a crack that burst teeth and blood together. The creature reeled, choking. Hagen stepped in and buried his axe in its neck. Not deep enough. The blade bit through fur and flesh and stuck in gristle. Hot blood sheeted over his wrists. The beast-man shrieked in a human voice ruined by an animal throat. Its free hand raked Hagen's cheek open to the teeth. Elsa lunged from the side and drove the kitchen knife into the thing's ribs again and again, feeling the hard cage shudder under each blow. The smell that came off it was unbearable. Wet, wool, dung, opened bowels. It collapsed in the doorway, kicking. Hagen stamped on its wrist until the bones snapped, then wrenched his axe free and split its skull. The thing jerked once, twice, and was still. No time to breathe. A second raider vaulted the fence into the yard, this one smaller, but broad as a barrel, tusks jutting from its lower jaw. It carried a bundle of smoking straw, with a butcher's cleaver jammed through it. Fire dribbled from the bundle as it ran for the thatch. Elsa, she understood at once. She snatched the iron pot from the hearth and hurled the dregs of stew water into its face. The beast snarled and stumbled blind. Hagen reached it in 2 strides. The cleaver came up, caught him under the arm, and bit through leather into flesh. He grunted, drove on, and hacked low. The axe took the raider in the thigh. Bone gave with a sound like green wood split on a block. It fell onto one knee, roaring. Hagen hit it again and nearly took the leg off. Blood pulsed out in thick ropes, black-red and steaming. The creature still crawled. It dragged itself through the mud with one hand, reaching for the dropped cleaver. Its fingers were almost on the haft when Elsa brought down the chopping board from the meat hook and smashed it across the back of its skull. The board shattered. Hagen finished the thing with a blow that opened its neck to the spine. Outside, Karnsbruck was coming apart. A house near the mill had been torn open, half the wall stove in. Through the gap, Elsa saw movement inside. Too much movement, frantic, intimate. A woman on the floor, with one beast-man kneeling on her arms while another ripped at her belly with hooked claws as if gutting a deer. Across the lane, old Jürgen had climbed onto his own roof with a pitchfork and was stabbing downward at shapes below. A thrown spear took him through the calf. He pitched off the thatch and vanished into a crush of horns, fur, and stamping hooves. His cries ended under the sound of chewing. "Grain store," Hagen said through bloody teeth. "They're pushing for the square." But Elsa was staring, because the raiders were not moving, like simple beasts maddened by blood. They were choosing, turning aside from some houses, swarming others. The cooper's place had been passed untouched, though it stood exposed. Widow Fleiss's cottage burned fiercely already, fire laid to all 4 corners at once. The storehouse where the village kept winter grain had been struck first. Someone had cut the bell rope at the shrine with a clean slash. Someone knew where the village was weakest, knew where panic would bloom fastest. Something cold slid down Elsa's spine. Then she saw it, hanging from the latch of their gate, swaying in the firelit dark, was a little horse carved from pine. 1 wheel missing, 1 ear broken. Mathers had dragged it everywhere as a child, until the wheel came off in the lane and Hagen promised to mend it. He never had. Elsa had put it away in the chest beside the bed. She had seen it there last winter beneath folded linen. Now it turned gently on its string, blackened by soot, as if nodding to her. "No," she whispered. Hagen followed her stare. His face did not change, but she felt the world harden around him. A horn blast sounded from the square, closer than before. The raiders in the lane fell back in strange obedience, drawing away from fights they might have won. One turned long enough to hack down a fleeing man, then loped after the others. It was not rout, it was command. Through the smoke, along the road that ran past the shrine, a shape emerged, taller than the rest, straight-backed, almost human in the posture, if not the proportions. A pelt hung from its shoulders. Curved horns rose from its brow, one bound with strips of red cloth and finger bones. Firelight licked across a face that might once have been a boy's, had it not been dragged halfway into bestial form, too sharp through the cheek, too long in the jaw, one eye hidden beneath a fall of lank dark hair, matted to the temple. In its hand it carried not a crude club or scavenged spear, but a woodsman's axe with the handle wrapped in old leather. Hagen went rigid. The figure halted in the center of the lane while beastmen milled around it, snorting and stamping, waiting. Elsa could not breathe. The horn-crowned thing turned its head slowly, looking over the houses, the flames, the dead in the mud. Looking, she felt with sick certainty. For them, at last its gaze found the doorway. The distance between them could not have been more than 30 paces, close enough for Elsa to see the scar under the chin, white against grime and fur. Matthys had got that scar from tumbling into a woodpile at 5. She had held him in her lap while he screamed and kicked and bled through her apron. The thing in the road smiled, not wide, not mad, something far worse, a private little curl of the mouth, as if sharing a joke only the 3 of them could understand. Hagen raised the shield. Elsa clutched the bloody kitchen knife so hard her fingers went numb. The horn-crowned figure lifted one clawed hand. The beastmen around it quieted at once. Then, across the crackle of burning thatch and the whimpers of dying villagers, it spoke in a voice roughened by age and something animal, but still carrying the bones of a child she had once sung to sleep. "Mother," it said. Elsa made a sound like something being torn. The figure's eye flicked to Hagen. Its smile vanished. For an instant, its face showed something unreadable. Hatred, triumph, hunger, grief, all knotted together so tightly they could no longer be separated. Then it snapped an order in the beast tongue. The raiders withdrew as quickly as they had come, not running, flowing. Some leapt fences, some vanished between houses, some dragged sacks and squealing captives with them into the dark. One paused only to torch the cooper's shed on its way out. In moments the lane was empty but for bodies, flame, and the toy horse turning on the gate. The horn-crowned thing was the last to go. It backed into the smoke, never taking its eye off the house, then turned and was swallowed by the burning night beyond the square. Only when it was gone did the pain seem to find Hagen. Blood ran dark down his arm from the cleaver wound. His cheek hung open in a red flap, yet he stood staring into the road as though struck in the skull. Elsa pushed past him into the yard. "Mathers!" she screamed into the firelit dark. "Mathers!" No answer came back from the forest. Only the crackle of burning roofs, the moaning of the wounded, and from somewhere near the shrine, a child crying for a mother who would never answer again. Elsa staggered to the gate and tore the toy from its string. It was real. Pinewood under soot, one missing wheel. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped it. Behind her, Hagen finally spoke, not loudly, not to her, to the night, to the trees, to whatever god still listened in a place like Karnsbruck. "My son is dead," he said, each word hammered flat. That thing is not him. But Elsa stood among ash and blood and burning thatch with the little carved horse in her hand, and knew that whatever had walked out of the Drackwall tonight had once been their boy. And worse than that, it had remembered the way home. Chapter 2. Tracks into the Black Pines. By dawn, Karnsbruck smelled like a butcher's ditch left open in summer. Rain had come again in the last hour before sunrise, a miserable thin drizzle that did nothing to quench the fires, but spread them, smearing soot across walls and turning ash to black paste underfoot. Smoke hung low over the village in greasy folds. Chickens wandered blind and singed through the wreck of the square. A horse with half its face burned raw stood swaying in the lane until one of the men finally put a hammer into its skull and dropped it twitching into the mud. Everywhere else, the dead waited. They lay in doorways and ditches, in cabbage patches, in the midden behind the tannery, by the shrine, with its bell rope hacked through and its little stone sigma blackened by smoke. Some had died quickly, most had not. There were old men gored through the belly, women with their throats laid open to the spine, boys trampled so hard their ribs had burst through their shirts. Krell, the militia sergeant, had been nailed to the granary door with 3 spears, his head hanging at an unnatural angle, jaw stripped of flesh as if something had gnawed him after death. Near the well, Widow Fleiss knelt upright against the pump as though in prayer. The beastmen had split her from collar to navel and pulled the cavity open wide, stuffing it with damp straw and chicken feathers. The village gathered around the bodies, the way beggars gathered around scraps. Not to mourn, not yet. First came the counting, then the searching, then the blame. Elsa moved through it all, numb and feverish, the carved pine horse clenched in one hand, hard enough to mark her palm with splinters. She had wrapped a scarf over her mouth against the stink, but the smell still got in through the weave. Blood, wet ash, excrement, open bowels, burned meat. Hagen stood near the shrine, while old Lotte stitched his cheek with pig-gut thread and a sail needle. He did not flinch once. The cleaver wound beneath his arm had been bound in strips torn from a dead man's shirt. Blood still seeped through the cloth in dark petals. He looked less like a husband now than something carved out of war itself. The priest, Father Anselm, had survived by locking himself in the shrine cellar. He came out, white-faced and damp, like something dug from under a stone. He stood on the shrine steps with rain beading on his bald scalp and tried to force order into the village with scripture and a shaking voice. "This is a trial," he said, "a scourge visited on the faithful. We endure, we hold together, we..." "Hold together?" someone shouted. It was Marta Head, whose husband lay in 3 pieces beside the broken cart shed. "My sons are gone." Others took it up at once. Voices became a mob before the priest could draw breath again. Why this house and not that one? They knew where the grain was. They knew which lanes we'd run. They knew. The word passed through the crowd like sparks through dry grass. Knew. Elsa felt all those faces turning, searching for somewhere to set the weight of their fear. She saw them glance at her, then at Hagen, then away and back again. Old Marta, who truly did see omens in everything, spat into the mud. "I said years ago that boy should have been given to the Templars for testing. He was 8, Elsa said, her voice low and dangerous. Old Marta rounded on her with her gums bared. "And now He comes back with horns!" A murmur rippled. Elsa stepped toward her. "Say his name again, Elsa," Hagen warned. But the old woman was not done. Mark me well. Such things don't come from nowhere. The taint was always in him, in the blood, in the house. Ah, that did it." Elsa crossed the distance in a heartbeat and struck Marta across the mouth with the carved horse still in her fist. Teeth skipped across the mud like little white seeds. The old woman screamed and fell on her side, clutching her face. Villagers surged forward, shouting, "Hagen was there first!" He planted himself between Elsa and the crowd, shield in one hand, axe in the other, his stitched cheek slick with fresh blood where the sudden movement had split it open. "Who's next?" he asked. No one answered. He looked half dead already, and still seemed capable of opening a man from throat to groin with one blow. The crowd broke around him, muttering. Grief was brave, only at a distance. By noon, 5 more bodies had been found. 7 living had not. Darker. One of them was little Gertie from the mill, only 6. Another was Rolf Bauer's daughter, old enough to understand exactly what had happened when the beasts dragged her away kicking. Elsa saw Rolf, sitting in the lane with a flail across his knees and his eyes fixed on nothing at all. He had been weeping at first. By noon there were no tears left, only a dry, flayed look to him, as if something essential had been scraped out from behind his face. Krael was dead, so command fell by default to Otto Weiss, a broad-backed charcoal burner who had once marched with state troops and never stopped mentioning it. He took 6 men fit enough to carry blades, and said they would track the herd before rain washed the spoor away completely. Hagen said at once, "I'm coming," Elsa said. "So am I." All eyes went to her again. Otto laughed once, without humor. "You'll slow us. I know the eastern paths as well as any of you," Elsa said. "Better than some. This isn't berry-picking." "No." She looked past him to the black line of the Drakwold. "It's my son." Hagen's face might have been stone if stone could hate. "That thing is not your son." She rounded on him. "It spoke. So do parrots. So do madmen. So do demons if you let them close enough. It remembered me." "And what did it remember, Elsa? Your voice, your touch, his own voice, sharpened like a drawn blade, or where to hurt us most?" "Allah, Allah." She flinched because that struck true. He saw it and pressed on, savage now because gentleness had long ago failed him. "You heard the old crone. The village is already whispering. If we do not go into that forest and kill it, they'll turn on us before the week is out." "Kill it," Elsa repeated. "You say that like you're talking about a rabid dog." Hagen stepped close enough that she could smell dried blood in his beard. "I am talking about the thing that led beasts into our home and made them butcher our neighbors while it watched." His voice dropped. I saw its face, too. That hurt more because she knew he had seen the scar, seen the eyes, seen enough to be afraid in ways anger could barely cover. Otto spat and shifted his spear. "Argue on the road if you want. I leave now." So they left. 6 men from Karnsbruck and 2 women, though no one would say it that way aloud. There was Otto, with his spear, and old breastplate green with verdigris, Hagen with axe and shield, Rolf Bauer with the threshing flail he had not set down once, the miller's son with a boar spear and hands that trembled, 2 trappers with bows and skinning knives, Father Anselm, absurdly, carrying a rusty mace from the shrine cellar and muttering prayers through his beard stubble. And Elsa, with a wood axe at her belt, a long knife in her boot, and Matthie's toy horse buried in the pocket of her skirt like a relic or a curse. They found the first spore in the east field, a patch of churned rye, hoof marks as broad as platters, blood spattered across the bent stalks. One of the trappers crouched and touched the ground. "Too many to count proper," he said. "Big herd, moving fast, drag marks here," he pointed. Something had been hauled through the crop on its heels. Elsa pictured little Gertie's shoe furrowing the soil and had to force bile back down. The trail led them to the edge of the Drackwald and then into it, where the light changed at once. That was always the way of that forest. You did not enter it so much as get swallowed. The pines crowded close, straight and black, with their branches knitting high overhead to keep the day out. Rain dripped from needles in slow, cold taps. Moss furred fallen trunks like rot-on meat. The ground was thick with old leaves that hid roots, holes and bones. Every few yards stood old stones half sunk into the earth, carved with runes worn almost blank by time and weather. Waystones, some called them. Boundaries, warnings, prayers, petrified into rock. Several had been toppled. One lay split open, its white interior smeared with filth and blood. Father Anselm made a sign against evil. No one mocked him. They moved in a ragged file, weapons ready, breaths clouding in the chill under the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a raven croaked. Somewhere else something answered it, with a sound too low and wet to be any bird. The first dead captive they found by mid-afternoon. It was not one of Karnsbruck's. A tinker from the road, maybe, or some unlucky woodcutter taken from another village. Male, stripped to the waist, tied spread-eagled to a pine by his own entrails. The guts had been wound around the trunk 3 times before they ran short. Beetles already crawled in the opened belly. His face had been peeled away from the skull and hung over one shoulder like a butcher's apron. The miller's son bent over and vomited. Rolf Bauer did not even blink. "If my girl's alive, I'm cutting their bellies open while they watch." "Quiet!" hissed one of the trappers. They all heard it then. A bell, not brass, not holy. A thin chiming clatter ahead in the trees, irregular and wrong. Otto lifted a fist, and the party halted. The sound came nearer, accompanied now by a soft dragging in the leaves. One of the trappers raised his bow. Through the trunks stumbled a shape, man-high, and bent. For an instant Elsa thought it was a beast man. Then it lurched into a strip of grey light, and she saw a man, or what remained of one, with antlers tied through the flesh of his shoulders and a string of little iron bells looped around his neck. His eyelids had been cut away. His mouth was sewn shut with horsehair. Every time he staggered, the bells rang. He saw them and began to make frantic, mewling noises through his stitched lips. "Gods preserve us," Father Anselm whispered. Otto took a step forward. "Hold him! He may know," the sewn man exploded, not from within but from behind. A spearhead punched through his spine and burst out his chest in a fan of ribs and blood. The bells shrieked as he dropped. Then the undergrowth erupted on both sides. Beastmen came roaring out of the ferns and bracken, a half-dozen in the first rush and more behind them, all rank fur and brass scraps and horn. One had a stag's skull lashed over its face like a mask. Another dragged a chain with butcher hooks tied to the end. Their breath smoked, their eyes gleamed. They hit the villagers with the mindless speed of rabid dogs and the cruel purpose of men. The first trapper got an arrow off. It took a beast in the throat. The creature clawed at the shaft, choking black blood, and still barreled onward, long enough to tackle him. They went down together in leaves and mud. The dying beast-man bit his nose off before the trapper managed to ram a knife under its jaw. Otto screamed for the line to hold, but there was no line now, only knots of panicked violence among the trees. A goat-headed brute swung a cleaver at Hagen's skull. He caught it on the shield. The blow rang like a church bell and drove him back a step. Hagen answered with a short axe cut that split the creature's forearm from wrist to elbow. Bone flashed white. The beast howled and head-butted him, horns screeching across the shield rim. Hagen shoved, twisted, and buried the axe under its chin. Teeth shattered. Blood and tongue sprayed hot across his hands. He ripped the blade free and turned in time to see another raider lunging for Elsa. She moved first. The wood axe came out of her belt in a blur and bit into the raider's knee sideways. The joint burst apart with a crack. The creature dropped, shrieking. Elsa stamped on its bent leg, pinned it, and drove her long knife up through the soft meat beneath the jaw. The point punched into the palate and out through one eye. The beastman convulsed around the blade so hard she thought it would break her wrist. To her left, Rolf Bauer fought like something that had already died and forgotten to fall. A beastman with a rusted sword slashed open his brow. Blood sheeted into his eyes. Rolf took the hit, stepped into it, and wrapped the flail chain around the creature's wrist. Then he yanked it close and smashed its face with the iron ball again and again until horns, teeth, and snout turned to red porridge. When another raider rushed him from behind, he whirled and caught it across the temple. The skull caved like kicked crockery. The miller's son did badly. Fear made him slow. His spear point skidded off a rib, and one of the creatures was inside his reach at once, tusks bared. It hit him low, driving him onto his back. The beastman's horns punched through his cheeks from below as it crushed down on his face. He screamed through a mouth suddenly full of bone. Then the raider began sawing at his throat with a chipped knife, not cutting cleanly but worrying the flesh apart in strips, while the boy kicked himself into the leaves. Father Anselm actually proved useful. One of the hook-chain beasts swung for his legs. The priest bellowed a prayer to Sigmar and cracked its muzzle with the shrine mace hard enough to break teeth into the brain. He looked shocked at what he had done, then did it twice more with wet, crunching determination. The ambush lasted less than a minute. It felt like an hour. When it ended, 2 beastmen had fled, 4 lay dead, and 1 writhed on the ground, trying to hold its own guts in with both hands. Karnsbruck had lost the miller's son, and 1 trapper, whose throat was mostly missing. The other trapper crouched beside his dying brother and muttered to him until the breath stopped rattling. Nobody spoke for a while after that. They just listened to the forest closing itself around them again. Drip of rain from the pines, buzz of flies already gathering, a far-off chuckle in the dark that might have been a crow or might not. Otto knelt by the sewn messenger and yanked the spear free. He turned the shaft over in his hands. It was not crude. The point had been honed properly. The wood was straight-grained ash, fletched with black feathers tied neat. Not a random strike, he muttered. Hagen looked deeper into the trees. No. The surviving trapper rose and pointed at the ground. Tracks split here, a few to either side for the ambush. Main herd kept on. They wanted to slow us, not stop us. Elsa wiped beast blood off her knife on a tuft of fern. Her hands were shaking now that the danger had passed. She hated that. During the fighting there had been no time for fear. Afterward it crawled into the hollows of her body and gnawed. She went to the dead boy from the mill and closed what remained of his eyes. One lid would not come down because of the horn punched through the cheek. Behind her, Hagen said, "He's herding us." No one asked who. They all knew. The rain thickened as they pressed on, and the light began to fail early under the pines. Before dusk, they came upon an old charcoal burner's clearing, half choked by briars and saplings. In the center stood the cold ring of a fire pit, and beside it, planted upright in the earth like a marker, was a child's rag doll from Karnsbruck village. Its head had been torn off and sewn back on upside down. Rolf Bauer gave a broken sound in his throat and turned away. Elsa stared at the doll and understood with a cold certainty that made the skin tighten on the back of her neck. This was not only a hunt, it was conversation. Each spoor left plain, each mutilation displayed, each token returned from the village like a fingertip in a box. Not random savagery, not merely beast hunger, but a hand reaching back through the dark to scratch old wounds open. Mathers was not just leading them deeper into the Drackwald, he was making sure they followed. Chapter 3. The Herdstone of Names. The clearing announced itself by smell long before the trees opened. Not wood smoke, not the honest stink of pitch and burned charcoal. This was sweeter, fouler, heavier on the back of the tongue. Blood gone half rotten in rainwater, old dung, hot tallow, wet fur, opened bowels, and the copper tang of fresh slaughter laid over all of it like a priest's blessing turned rancid. The Drackwald held smells close under its boughs. They lingered in the needles and the moss and the cold damp folds between roots. What rolled toward the Karnsbruck hunting band through those black pines was the breath of a place where too much had died and too little had stayed dead. Otto raised a fist. The survivors of the morning ambush crouched among the trees, mud to their knees, wet bark cold against their shoulders. No one spoke. The rain had dwindled to a fine mist, not enough to wash the blood from their boots, only enough to make everything slick. Hagen stood at the front, shield arm low, axe head black with drying gore. His stitched cheek had torn wider over the day. The pig gut thread had snapped in 2 places, and the wound gaped when he clenched his jaw. Elsa noticed it because she could not bear to look too long at the clearing beyond. But she looked anyway. The pines thinned, then ended altogether around a long, unnatural open space hacked out of the forest floor. No grass grew there, no bramble, no fern, no harmless growth of any kind. The earth was churned into black mud, shot through with ash and old bone splinters, as if something beneath it had soured the soil. At the center rose the herdstone. It was taller than a man and broader than an ox cart, a jag of dark rock thrust up from the ground like a broken tooth. Rain slicked its surface. Symbols had been carved into it in deep, violent strokes, not letters but gouges and spirals and horn shapes that hurt the eye if stared at too long. Red matter clogged the deeper cuts. Some of it was fresh enough to glisten. Around the stone hung trophies on rawhide cords, skulls, finger bones, bird wings, split antlers, the dried hands of children. The whole thing seemed to drink the failing light and give nothing back. There were captives bound around it. Elsa saw little Gertie from the mill first, because children drew the eye by instinct. The girl had been tied to a stake, hammered into the mud, wrists crossed behind the post, ankles lashed together. Her face was blue-white, with cold and shock beneath the grime. Beside her were 3 others from Karnsbruck and 2 strangers, all stripped to shirts or underclothes, all bruised, all lashed so tight the ropes had eaten into skin. One man hung slumped forward with his chin on his chest and a flap of scalp missing from one side of the head. The Bower girl was there too, alive by the miserable standard of the word. Her dress had been torn down to the waist. She stared straight ahead and did not blink. Around the captives the herd gathered. There were more than Elsa had feared, and fewer than Hagen had predicted, which somehow made them worse. Enough to kill everyone in Karnsbruck and still feast at leisure, not enough to be an army. A raiding herd, 20, maybe 30. Some moved with brutish impatience, stamping split hooves in the mud, snorting steam through bovine nostrils, their axes and cleavers knocked from scavenged iron. Others wore scraps of mail, old human helmets bent out of shape to fit horn and muzzle, trinkets of teeth and brass charms dangling from fur-matted throats. A pair of lean hounds prowled the edge of the clearing, little more than rib and fang with scabbed hides stretched over them. The beast circled the captives and licked spilled blood from the mud in quick pink strokes. At the herdstone's base stood a shaman. The thing wore a crown of antlers so wide it seemed part tree, part carcass. Strips of skin had been tacked to its shoulders with thorns, and its staff was hung with dead ravens and little cages full of bones that clicked together as it moved. Its fur was patchy and diseased, the flesh beneath slick with old sores and painted marks. One eye was milk white, the other burned like a coal under the brow. It daubed the herdstone with a fistful of offal, muttering in a throat-choked beast tongue, while the herd stamped and swayed. And there, before the stone, stood Mathis. Elsa would have known him in any hell, not because he looked as he had as a child. There was almost nothing left of that. He had grown long and hard and wrong. One horn curved from his brow in a dark polished arc, and the other had only just begun to push through the skin on the opposite side, leaving the flesh there bruised and split. His shoulders were broader than Hagen's now, but roped rather than thick. His body more wolf than ox, all wiry violence under a patchwork of leather straps and fur. One of his hands still looked mostly human, if one ignored the blackened nails and the 2 long fingers. The other had gone half-clawed. Scars crossed him everywhere, white old ones, red new ones, ritual cuts, whip tracks, bite marks. His face was a battlefield between the boy he had been and the beast he had become. Human mouth, human eyes, though one was ringed in yellow now. Too much jaw, too much brow, too much hunger set into the features. He wore at his belt a child's trinkets of home, a brass buckle from some village coat, a pewter charm from the Sigmar shrine, a little strip of blue ribbon Elsa had once tied around his wrist at a spring fair. The sight of that ribbon struck her harder than any wound. She put a hand over her mouth before the sound could escape. Otto leaned close. "We go for the captives first, quick and hard. If we can cut 3 free before—" "No," Hagen said. His voice was low, but it cut the air like the first stroke of an axe. Otto glared at him. "No, if we rush the stakes, we die in the open. So what's your wisdom, woodsman? We kneel and ask the beasts for mercy?" Hagen never took his eyes off the clearing. "We kill the shaman, then confusion, then the captives. Father Anselm swallowed audibly. That abomination is making ready for some rite. As if to prove him right, the shaman lifted both arms and gave a choking cry. Two beast men dragged forward a fresh carcass from the edge of the clearing. Not deer, not boar, human. The body had been opened from sternum to groin. The organs slipped and shone in the dim light. The thing had once been a road warden, if the torn coat meant anything, but its head was gone, and one hand had been gnawed to a stump. The shaman plunged both arms into the body cavity, up to the elbows, and rooted there like a cook stirring a pot. When it pulled its arms back out, strings of gut hung from the wrists. The herd answered with stamping bellows. Little Gertie began to cry at last, a thin, exhausted sound. Matthews turned his head toward her. He did not smile. He only watched, expression unreadable, while the child shook against her bindings. Elsa leaned forward before she knew she meant to. Hagen's hand shot out and clamped on her forearm. "Not yet. It's him," she whispered. His grip tightened. "I have eyes. He's there. He's listening. If I can speak to him. If you stand up now, you die with a beast's spear in your ribs. Then let me try before you start a slaughter." His face turned to her. It had gone flat with fury, but something underneath that fury trembled. "Do you think there is anything in him waiting for a mother's voice?" She stared back. "I know there is." Hagen's mouth curled. "And if there isn't?" Elsa had no answer for that. None he would accept. None she herself trusted. In the clearing, the shaman barked a command. Two of the larger beast-men hauled the half-conscious man from the stake nearest the herdstone and dragged him through the mud by his feet. His head knocked roots and stones. One eye opened once, rolled, and closed. They flung him at Matthes's feet. The herd quieted. Even the hounds stopped moving. Matthes looked down at the man. The captive stirred weakly, rolled onto one elbow, and raised a hand in instinctive pleading. Elsa recognized him then. Jorek, a pig farmer from the next lane over, a man who had once mended their fence for a basket of onions. He tried to speak, and managed only blood bubbles. The shaman thrust a knife toward Matthes. It was not a crude thing. Long, curved, of dark metal. Its edge seemed to drink the grey light, just as the herdstone did. All around the clearing the beast-men began to grunt and stamp in rhythm, a slow building pulse like the beating of some huge, diseased heart. Matthews took the knife. For one suspended instant, Elsa thought she would see hesitation, that something human would tremble in him, that the child in him would remember Jorek's piglets or the smell of his sty in summer, or the times he had handed Matthews a bruised apple over the fence. Matthews knelt by the man and took his hair gently in one hand, almost tenderly, as though helping a drunkard lift his head. Then he cut his throat, not clumsily, not in a frenzy. One clean, hard draw from ear to ear that opened flesh so wide the spine flashed white for a heartbeat beneath the gush. Blood pumped over his wrist and pattered onto the herdstone mud. Jorek's legs hammered against the ground. His mouth worked silently. Matthews held him through the worst of it, until the kicking slowed, then eased the body down like a son laying a father to rest. The herd roared approval. Elsa's stomach folded in on itself. For a moment the clearing blurred. Hagen released her arm because she had stopped straining and gone utterly still. "There," he said very softly, "there is your proof." But Elsa did not answer, because Matthews had turned his face after the kill, and what she saw there was not triumph. It was misery. Not enough to stop him, not enough to save anyone, yet real all the same. A crack opening for the briefest instant through the hard black glaze that had set over him. The knife remained in his hand. His head lowered a fraction, and she saw his shoulders rise and fall once, as though the act had cost him some inward breath he could not afford. Then the shaman struck him across the back with the staff. Not hard enough to wound, but hard enough to command. The cages of bones clattered, Matez stiffened. The human look vanished. When he turned again, he wore that same private, bitter smile Elsa had seen in Karnsbruck's burning lane. Otto whispered, "Now?" Hagen nodded once. The surviving trapper loosed first. The arrow hissed from the tree line and struck the shaman high in the chest. For a glorious instant Elsa believed the thing might drop. Instead it staggered, snapped the shaft off near the feathers, and screamed with such force that birds exploded from the pines all around the clearing. Beastmen spun toward the trees, roaring. Hagen was already moving. He crashed out of the undergrowth like a felled trunk given life. Shield high, axe low, he hit the nearest raider square in the breastbone. The beast man went backward into the mud, breath driven out in a grunt. Hagen chopped down into its face before it could recover. Bone split. One horn flew off, spinning. Rolf Bauer followed half a pace behind, flail whistling. The iron ball smashed into another raider's knee and burst it backward. The beast shrieked and dropped. Rolf's second blow erased the shriek and most of the head with it. Then the clearing became a slaughter yard. Otto and the trapper drove straight for the captives, thrusting and stabbing, while Father Anselm blundered toward the herdstone, bellowing Sigmar's name as if volume alone could sanctify this place. The beastmen met them from both flanks. Spears jabbed, axes flashed. Mud flew in black ropes under stamping hooves. Elsa ran not toward safety but toward Matisse, a beastman with a bull's skull strapped over its own muzzle lunged into her path. She ducked under the first swing of its cleaver and felt the wind of it take hairs from her scalp. The second strike she caught on her wood-axe haft. The impact numbed both arms to the shoulder. The creature pushed in close, snorting carrion stink into her face, its strength grinding hers down inch by inch. Elsa let go with one hand. The beastman thought it had her. It opened its mouth to bite. She ripped the long knife from her boot and drove it upward through the soft place beneath the jaw. The point sank deep into the palate. Hot blood jetted over her fist. The creature convulsed, still trying to force the cleaver down even while its legs folded under it. She twisted the knife and tore it free. It dropped to its knees, gargling. She hacked the side of its neck twice with the axe before it toppled. A shout ripped across the clearing. Hagen. She looked in time to see him slam shield first into the antler-crowned shaman. The abomination reeled off the herdstone and struck the mud. Father Anselm brought the rusty mace down on its shoulder with a crack like a snapped beam. The shaman shrieked and swept the priest's legs out with its staff. Anselm crashed backward. One of the hanging bone cages burst under him. The shaman rolled, came up on all fours, and vomited something black and crawling into Father Anselm's face. The priest screamed and clawed at his eyes. Hagen hacked at the shaman's head. It jerked aside with impossible speed. The axe bit antler, not skull, and stuck for a half-second. That was enough. The shaman's staff slammed into Hagen's wounded side. He doubled over, choking. The staff came down again, this time on the back of his neck, and drove him to one knee in the mud. Matthews saw he had not yet joined the melee. He stood before the herdstone with the ritual knife in hand, while the herd fought around him. Now his head turned sharply toward Hagen. Elsa saw recognition flare there like a struck spark. The shaman lifted the staff for a killing blow. Matthys moved. He crossed the space in 3 strides and caught the descending staff in his clawed hand. The impact shuddered through both of them. Beast and shaman locked eyes. The clearing seemed, for a strange, suspended instant, to narrow until only those 2 figures existed at all. The shaman barked a command. Matthys did not obey. Instead, he twisted, wrenched the staff sideways, and drove his horned brow into the shaman's face. Bone crunched. One antler tine snapped off and spun into the mud. The shaman screamed wetly. Hagen, still on one knee, looked up into the face of the son he had declared dead. Matthys could have killed him then. Elsa saw the choice pass across him as clearly as if it had been spoken. Old hatred, old hurt, the whole stunted black crop that had been grown in him by forest fear and beatings. His lip curled. The ritual knife rose. Matthys, she screamed the name so hard her throat tore on it. The sound reached him. It reached some chamber in him not yet wholly bricked over. His head snapped toward her. She stood in the center of the clearing among bodies, mud to the ankles, beast blood on her apron, looking no doubt less like a mother than some village fury dragged up from hell. She did not care. "The winter fever," she cried. "You burned and shook, and I sat 3 nights with you. The horse from Altdorf Fair. The cut on your chin at the woodpile. I carried you, Matthys. I carried you." His face changed, not softened. That was too much to hope. But the smile broke. The hard beast certainty in him faltered. She saw the child beneath the horn, and scar and blood, not restored, not cleansed, but alive enough to hear. His breathing quickened. The knife dipped. "Come back," she said, though both of them knew there was no road for that. Behind her, Hagen surged up with a roar, pain and fury and terror all bound together into one blind stroke. He ripped the axe from the mud and hurled it at Matthys with both hands. Elsa saw it turning through the air, saw Matthys's eyes widen, not with fear but with something worse, recognition fulfilled, the old lesson confirmed at the worst possible moment. Father kills. Mother pleads. The world chooses. The axe. The thrown blade missed his skull by inches only because the shaman, staggering and blood-faced, lurched between them. The axe buried itself in the creature's collarbone and drove deep. The shaman let out a bubbling howl and collapsed against the herdstone, pinned there for one awful heartbeat by iron and bone. The clearing exploded in noise. Matthys's face went empty, then savage. He turned on Hagen with a scream that did not belong to men at all. The ritual knife flashed. Hagen got the shield up just in time. The blade punched through rotten wood, missing his eye by a thumb's breadth. Matthys ripped it free and slashed again, carving grooves across the shield boss. Hagen crashed into him bodily, and father and son went down together in the blood mud at the foot of the herdstone, while around them beastmen and villagers hacked one another to pieces in the failing light. Whatever fragile bridge Elsa's words had built was gone, and the whole clearing was falling into hell. Chapter 4. The child with no home. The clearing had become a charnel pit of mud and steam and screaming. Rain fell in a thin, cold drift through the open space above the herdstone, hissing where it struck blood-warm bodies, turning the ground into a glistening paste of trampled earth, spilled guts, and snapped shafts. The stink was beyond filth now. It was holy in its own obscene way, a sacrament of opened men and beast blood and voided bowels and hot iron. Every breath tasted of copper and smoke, and the sweet sour reek of death half-chewed. Hagen and Matthews hit the ground like fighting dogs thrown into a ditch. The shield skidded away at once, spinning across the mud and slamming into one of the captive's stakes. Hagen landed hard on his wounded side and felt something tear deeper under the cleaver cut from Karnsbruck. Pain burst white across his skull. Before it could blind him, Mattis was on top of him, one knee crushing his ribs, the ritual knife sawing down in savage, repeated thrusts. Hagen caught the boy's wrist with both hands and stopped the blade a finger's width from his right eye. A finger's width. That was all. He saw his own face reflected, warped in the knife, saw Mattis's face above it, twisted by effort and fury, rain running off the curve of the horn and dripping from the chin scar. There was strength in him beyond any man's. Hagen's arms shook. Tendons stood out in cords along his neck. The knife edged lower, pricking skin. "Do it, then!" Hagen snarled through gritted teeth. "If there's naught left in you but beast, do it!" Matthew's lip peeled back from his teeth. Up close there was so much of the child, and so little. The eyes were wrong now, ringed in feral amber, but Hagen knew the set of them when they narrowed. He knew the scar under the chin, knew the line between the brows that had once come when a little boy tried to tie knots with cold fingers. The knife pressed harder. Blood trickled warm into Hagen's temple. Then Matthews spoke, not in the beast tongue, not in the barked cadence of the herd, but in the voice that had said, "Mother," in the burning lane. "You came now." The words hit harder than the knife. Hagen's grip faltered for an instant. Matthis felt it and leaned in, the blade kissing the corner of his eye. "Not when the dark took me," Matthis hissed. "Not when I screamed for you until my throat bled. Not when they found me. Not when they fed me filth and beat me when I cried. Now." Hagen's breath came raw. "We searched, too slowly. We searched until snow covered the tracks." Matthews made a sound halfway between a laugh and a choke. And then the knife trembled, not from weakness, from strain. Rain stung both their eyes. Around them the fight raged in disconnected flashes, Otto spearing a beastman through the belly near the captive's stakes, Rolf Bauer smashing a hound's spine with the flail, Father Anselm on his knees clawing black, crawling things from his face and eyes. Hagen gathered spit and blood in his mouth and spoke into his son's snarling face. "I never stopped looking for a heartbeat, a tiny, terrible heartbeat." Matthis hesitated. It was enough. Elsa came in from the side with a dead beastman's axe in both hands and struck Matthis across the shoulders. It was not a clean blow. She had no angle and no room to swing properly. The edge hacked through fur, leather, and flesh, bit into muscle near the collarbone, then stuck. Matthis screamed and rolled off Hagen in a spray of black-red blood. "Get up!" Elsa shouted. Hagen scrambled for breath and purchase in the mud, while Matthis ripped the embedded axe free with his clawed hand and flung it aside. He came to his feet all at once, not rising so much as unfolding, taller and more terrible than either of them when seen unbowed. Blood sheeted from the wound Elsa had opened. He barely seemed to notice. Then the herd turned. Until that instant the fight had still held some pattern. Villagers carving toward the captives, beastmen trying to drive them back, the antler-crowned shaman, writhing pinned against the herdstone by Hagen's thrown axe. But the moment Mates broke from his father and stood bleeding before the stone, every eye in the clearing shifted. The herd sensed the split in its own heart. The shaman proved it first. Pinned though it was, blood bubbling from its shattered face and opened collar, the creature tore itself forward off the axe head with a wet, ripping sound that made Elsa's stomach lurch. Flesh and gristle peeled around the embedded blade. One shoulder collapsed uselessly, but hatred alone seemed to keep it upright. It planted its crooked staff in the mud and screamed a command that cracked like rotten timber. 3 of the larger beastmen answered at once. Not on the villagers, on Mathis. They crashed toward him roaring, their loyalty as immediate and stupid as dogs set on a wounded littermate. One bore a notched falchion, another carried a heavy maul of iron-bound oak. The third wore a necklace of human ears and came bare-handed, all claw and horn and brute mass. Mathis turned from Hagen and Elsa to meet them. The first raider, the one with the falchion, slashed for the neck. Mathis slipped inside the swing with a speed so sudden it looked like sorcery. He caught the beastman's sword arm at the elbow and snapped it backward over his own shoulder. Bone burst through fur in white splinters. Before the scream finished, Mathis drove the ritual knife up under the creature's jaw and out through the top of its skull. The point came out slick and dark near one horn. He kicked the body free and spun just as the maul descended. The blow would have smashed a horse's spine. Mathis took it on his forearm. The sound was a butcher's shop sound, a hammer on marrow. His arm bent wrong, but not fully. Something cracked. He snarled, caught the haft under his other hand, and yanked the brute close enough to bite. Not metaphor, not fear. He bit through the beastman's nose and upper lip in one savage wrench, spat the cartilage and skin aside, then drove the knife into its belly and ripped sideways. Intestines billowed out in a hot grey rope, steaming in the cold rain. The brute stared down stupidly at its own spilling insides before Mates shouldered it away. The ear-necklaced raider hit him from behind. Both of them went down into the mud, clawing and gouging like animals. The larger beastman smashed Mathis's face into the ground once, twice, 3 times, until teeth and mud and blood mixed together. Mathis answered by jamming his good thumb into the creature's eye socket and pushing. The eye burst wet across his knuckles. The beast howled and reared back. Mathis got a knee under it, bucked it over, seized one horn in each hand, and twisted until the neck gave with a crack like a branch underfoot. He rolled free, panting. All around him, the herd had begun to falter. Some beastmen still fought the villagers out of simple hunger and rage, but others stamped and bawled in confusion, looking from their bleeding chosen war leader to the maimed shaman by the stone, and sensing what beasts always sensed first, power moving. Elsa saw it, and so did Hagen. "Captives!" Otto bellowed. The command finally broke the paralysis of the survivors from Karnsbruck. The trapper slashed ropes. Otto braced his spear against a charging hound and let the creature impale itself nearly to the shaft before stamping its head into the mud. Rolfbauer reached his daughter's stake and hacked at the bindings with hands so slick from blood he nearly dropped the blade twice. When she sagged into him, he made a sound Elsa had never heard from a grown man, a sound more like something torn from a wound than a cry. Little Gertie could not stand. Elsa ran to her and cut the rope at the child's wrists. The girl collapsed forward, limbs stiff and useless, and clung to Elsa with all the desperate strength left in her. "It's me," Elsa whispered, though the child barely seemed to know what any face was anymore. "It's me. Hold on." Across the clearing, Father Anselm had regained his feet and was trying to wrench Hagen's axe from the herdstone. He got it loose at last in a shower of blood and stone chips, only for the shaman to rake its staff across his ribs. Iron nails studding the wood tore through priestly robes, flesh, and muscle. Anselm screamed, staggered, and dropped to one knee with his side laid open in 3 wet strips. The shaman lifted the staff again for the kill. Matthews saw. He moved before thought, before allegiance, before anything that could be called reason. He hit the shaman so hard both went off their feet. They crashed against the herdstone and slid down in a tangle of antlers, claws, leather, and mud. The staff flew one way, the ritual knife another. Mathis's broken arm hung nearly useless, but he still fought with his other hand, his knees, his teeth, his horned brow. The shaman was older but filled with a kind of diseased tenacity that made death work hard for its meal. It clawed Matthew's face open from forehead to cheek. Mathis drove his thumb into the shaman's milk-white eye. The creature bit his wrist to the bone. They tore at each other in the mud under the shadow of the stone like sons of some lesser, fouler god. Then the shaman found words. Not the beast tongue. Something older. Something slick and thick and wrong. The air changed. Elsa felt it before she understood it. A pressure in the gums. A trembling behind the eyes. The herdstone's carved grooves began to shine with a wet internal redness. Blood in the mud around its base shivered and started to creep uphill, threading back toward the stone in little living streams. The trophies hanging from it rattled, skulls clicked, dried child hands turned as though trying to grasp. "Back," Father Anselm croaked, one hand pressed to his ripped side. "Back from it." No one got far enough. The herdstone woke. A pulse ran through it. Not light, not sound, but a convulsion in the world itself. Men and beast-men alike stumbled. One of the captives, who had just been cut loose, fell screaming as the blood from his own split wrists leapt off his skin in thin red jets toward the stone. Hagen felt every old scar on his body burn at once. Elsa nearly dropped Gertie as pain knifed through her temples. The shaman laughed through a mouthful of blood. Matthews looked up at the stone above him, and in that instant understood what the creature intended. Not victory in the clearing, consecration. All this death, all this pursuit, all the carefully arranged cruelty from Karnsbruck to here, it had not only been revenge or sport. The shaman had been feeding the herdstone names and blood, drawing village and herd together into one wound to be opened at the right moment. The captives, the returned toys, the public slaughter, the son brought back before father and mother, every drop meant to sweeten the offering. And if the thing was allowed to finish, whatever would answer from the dark would not stop at Karnsbruck. Matthews gave up on killing the shaman cleanly. He seized it by the throat and smashed its head against the herdstone again and again until one antler snapped, until teeth sprayed from its mouth, until the back of its skull left meat on the carved rock. Still it clawed and laughed. Still the red light spread. Hagen staggered toward them, found the dropped axe, and snatched it up. Matthews looked at him once. In that look was all the wreckage between them. The winters lost, the searches that had failed, the beatings in the woods, the burning village, the kill in the clearing, hate, need, memory, shame. Then Matthias barked. The stone. It was the first order Hagen had ever taken from his son. He took it. Hagen charged and buried the axe into one of the herdstone's carved seams. Sparks and blood-red light spat from the impact. The blade bit shallow. Not enough. The stone shuddered, and a crack, hair-thin and dark, ran down from the strike. The shaman screamed in sudden real fear. Mathis ripped the creature bodily around and shoved it against the crack. Then, with his good hand at its throat and his broken arm dangling, he drove his horned head forward and pinned the shaman there by brute force. "Again!" he roared. Hagen struck where the crack had opened. This time the blade went deeper. The herdstone split with a sound like a giant taking breath through broken teeth. Red light burst from the wound, blinding and hot. The shaman shrieked as the crack widened through its chest, chewing flesh and bone apart between the opening halves of the stone. One arm vanished to the shoulder. Ribs sprang loose. Its spine showed black for an instant, and then came apart in a shower of gore. The creature died in pieces, screaming right to the last. But the stone was still opening. Not cracking now, opening. Something moved inside the red. Elsa saw only a suggestion of shape, too large and too wrong for the eye to hold. A curl like horn, a wet brightness like many eyes, the promise of teeth, the cold certainty that if it came through, there would be no village left in Middenland, small enough for mercy to remember. Mathis saw it too. He did not hesitate. He threw himself into the split, not into whatever lay beyond. Against the stone itself, bracing shoulder and hip and both feet in the mud, shoving with everything left in him while blood streamed from his face and his ruined arm flopped uselessly. He screamed with the effort, a raw sound made of terror and fury and a child's refusal all knotted into one. The two halves of the herdstone ground against him. Flesh peeled from his shoulder where the rock bit. Bone ground audibly. "Hagen!" Elsa shouted. Father and mother moved together then, because there was no room left for anything else. Hagen heaved on the axe buried in the crack. Elsa, still clutching little Gertie under one arm, snatched up the fallen shaman's staff and jammed its butt into the seam as a lever. Father Anselm limped in and threw his weight beside hers, blood pouring down his leg. Otto and Rolf, captives in tow, backed away toward the trees, but not before Otto hurled his spear into the crack to wedge it tighter. The stone convulsed. Then it broke. It did not merely split. It collapsed inward on itself, the upper half shearing off and crashing down in a thunderous rain of jagged slabs. Red light exploded out in one final blinding gout and vanished as though sucked into a pit. A shock wave of hot wind and blood stink hit the clearing. Beastmen screamed. Some dropped where they stood, clutching their heads. Others fled outright into the trees, bawling in panic, their courage gone with the shaman's death. When the dust and steam settled, the herdstone was a ruin of black fragments and pulped flesh, and Mathis was on his knees among them. Elsa ran to him and nearly fell. The left side of his body was a ruin. The shoulder had been skinned almost to the collarbone. One thigh was open to the muscle where stone had gouged it. His broken arm hung by strips of flesh and leather. Blood poured into the mud faster than rain could wash it thin. Yet he was still awake, still breathing. Barely. Hagen came up behind Elsa with the axe in his hand and stopped dead at the sight. For a long second, none of them spoke. The clearing around them was full of aftermath. Beastmen limping into the dark or twitching in death, freed captives sobbing or staring, Father Anselm praying through broken teeth, Otto dragging the wounded toward the tree line, Rolf carrying his daughter as though she weighed nothing at all. The battle was over. Only the family remained in the center of it. Elsa knelt in the gore and put both hands on Mathis's face. He flinched first, then stilled. Up close, he looked young again, in the worst possible way, not because the beast had gone, but because pain had stripped the mask of command from him. She saw the boy drowned under all the ruin, saw the child who had once slept with his mouth open and one fist curled against his cheek. "We can get you out," she said. It was a lie the moment it left her mouth. She said it anyway because mothers lied against death as naturally as breathing. Mathis's mouth twitched. "No, Hagen, help me." Hagen did not move. His face had gone grey beneath the blood and mud. The axe head lowered slowly toward the ground. He looked as if he had been gutted and left standing by sheer stubbornness. "We take him," Elsa said, more fiercely. "We take him home." At that, Mathis gave a ragged laugh that turned into a cough. Blood flecked his lips. "Home?" he whispered. The word had no mockery in it. That made it worse. He turned his head with effort and looked past them toward the edge of the clearing, where the surviving villagers waited in horror and exhaustion. Elsa followed his gaze. She saw what he saw. Their faces, the terror in them, the revulsion, the dawning understanding of what he was. She saw Rolf clutch his daughter tighter, saw Gertie hide her face in Otto's coat, saw Father Anselm looking between Martes and the shattered herdstone, with the expression of a man already composing the necessary prayers for burning. There was no road back to Karnsbruck, not through those eyes, not through the Empire, not through a world that knew only pyres for things like him. Mathis knew it too. If he came with them, he would be hunted by villagers, priests, witch hunters, militia, by every frightened man with a torch and a sharpened hoe. And if some part of the forest still answered in his blood, he might one night rise hungry in their midst and finish the work he had begun. He looked at Hagen then. For the first time since the burning lane, the hatred in his eyes was gone. Not forgiven, not healed, simply burned out, leaving only a blackened vacancy and something harder to bear than rage. "I waited," Mathis said. Hagen's throat worked. When he spoke, the words came like stones pulled from a well. "I know. It was too little, too late, too nonetheless." Something passed over Mathis's face at that. Perhaps relief, perhaps only exhaustion. He pushed Elsa's hands gently away and tried to rise. His legs failed once. The second time he found his feet. "Herd'll come back," he muttered. "Other herds, they smell blood. You need to move. You can barely stand," Elsa said. He gave her a look so nakedly familiar, it almost stopped her heart. The same look he had worn as a boy, when pretending a scraped knee did not hurt. Then he bent, snatched the woodsman's axe from the mud, the old one he had carried since the first raid, Hagen's pattern, if not Hagen's actual tool, and turned toward the trees. Elsa grabbed at him. Her fingers slipped on blood and wet leather. "No." He paused. Rain whispered through the pines. Somewhere far off, deeper in the Drakewald, a horn answered another horn. Mathis did not look back at first. When he did, it was only halfway, enough that one yellow-ringed eye found hers through the dark and the steam and the ruin. "Mother," he said, not the taunting voice from the burning lane. not the hard command voice of the herd, the child's voice, just for that single word. Then he went into the trees. Hagen made as if to follow, one step only. Then he stopped, the need to run after his son broken, against the knowledge that there was nowhere to run to. Elsa stood in the wrecked clearing with blood to her elbows, and watched the black pines swallow the shape of the horn-crowned child until there was nothing left but rain and darkness. No one spoke for a long while. At last Otto forced them to move. The captives had to be half carried. Father Anselm left a trail of blood from his torn side. Rolf never set his daughter down. Hagen walked like an old man with the axe across his shoulders. Elsa walked empty-handed because somewhere between the herdstone and the tree line she had dropped the carved pine horse and not even noticed. They reached Karnsbruck the next day with fewer than had left it, and the village received them not with joy but with the frightened gratitude reserved for survivors of plague. The tale spread in broken pieces, growing stranger each time it was told. Beastmen, a blood shrine, a horned abomination that killed its own. A son returned and lost again. Some called it mercy, some called it deceit. Father Anselm preached that Sigmar had tested them and delivered them from corruption by fire and steel. He did not mention the way Elsa still woke in the night saying Mathis's name into her blanket. Spring came grudgingly. The burned houses were rebuilt badly. Fresh thatch hid old scorch marks. New fences went up where blood had soaked the old posts black. Life returned, because life always did, even in places where it had no right. But Karnsbruck never forgot. Children were called indoors at dusk with more urgency than before. No one laughed when dogs barked at the tree line. Hagen mended tools in silence and sharpened blades too often. Elsa kept looking up whenever the wind came from the east, as though grief had trained her ears to listen for one tread among many. They did not speak much of Mathis, because there was no way to do it that did not open everything again. Months later, after the first hard storm of autumn, traders brought news from another village deeper along the Drakvald edge. A beastmen warband had been found butchered near an old stone circle after a night of unnatural howling. Men and beasts both lay hacked apart. Among the dead was a horned shaman split nearly in two from collar to hip by repeated axe blows. In its throat had been jammed a woodsman's knife of common make, the handle wrapped in blue ribbon gone black with old blood. Hagen turned the knife over in his hands when the trader showed it. He knew the notch in the bone grip. He knew the pattern of the leather binding. He had made it himself years before, for a son who used to follow him into the timber lots and begged to whittle branches into spears. Elsa touched the handle with one finger and closed her eyes. There was no body, no certainty, only a knife, a dead monster, and the forest beyond Karnsbruck, vast and black, and patient as ever, keeping its last secrets close.